Give me homework. All right, the immune system is chapter 43. This is how animals defend themselves. Remember, we talked about plant defenses like the hypersensitive response, physical barriers, chemical barriers. This is really about animals. Innate immunity and adaptive immunity. It's important that you know the difference between the two, and you're going to have a couple opportunities in class to pick that up, but I want to make sure we're clear on that. Innate immunity is the active immediately upon infection and is the same whether or not the pathogen has been encountered before. This is common to all animals. However, adaptive immunity is just that. It's adaptive. It's found only in vertebrates, and it produces a vast arsenal of receptors, each of which recognizes a feature typically found only on a particular part of a particular molecule in a particular pathogen. It is enhanced by previous exposure to the pathogen. So the lab that you are doing in class is about adaptive immunity, where they're looking at creating antibodies. Acquired immune response is part of your adaptive immunity and is activated after the innate immunity response develops. It's activated after the innate immune response, and it develops more slowly. So you might hear adaptive as acquired. Either way, you're going to hear that. So it happens after the innate, and it develops more slowly. So it's not as immediate, not as quick. So let's look at some examples of these. Innate immunity, all animals have this. It's a very rapid response. So maybe some examples would be skin secretions. You actually secrete sweat. There is a purpose. It actually reduces bacterial growth. Your mucous membranes will help protect your mouth, things like that. Your internal defense system, you have some parts of your immune system that phagocytic cells, they're going to go and they're going to engulf in bacteria or things and try to kill them. Natural killer cells, antimicrobial proteins, your inflammatory response. The reason you get that red, swelling, inflamed is because that's an immune response. Two pathogens. A pathogen is something that is foreign that your body does not like bacteria, fungus, virus. Adaptive immunity, remember, is vertebrates only. And you have two parts of this response, the humoral response and the cell-mediated response. So the humoral response is where the antibodies defend against infection in body fluids. Okay? So antibodies, body fluids. The cell-mediated response is where cytotic cells defend against infection in the body cells. So we're not talking fluid here, we're talking about actual cells. And remember that adaptive immunity is slower than innate. So let's look at innate immunity. In vertebrates, their innate immunity starts with their exoskeleton, because that's a hard core, going to be a barrier. They have lysozymes, which are enzymes that break down bacterial cell walls that protects their digestive tract. The immune cells are called hemocytes and travel through the circulatory fluid. Remember, they don't necessarily have blood. Some of the phagocytic and some trigger the production of chemicals to kill the pathogens. Remember, pathogens are those foreign things we don't like. And here is a picture of that. So you've got your pathogen gets in, a phagocytic cell is going to, this is your phagocytic cell here, this whole thing, is going to take it and engulf it. This is actually called phagocytosis, this act of moving the membrane around and engulfing. It's a form of endocytosis. Then the lysosome containing an enzyme, the lysozymes, are going to encounter it and break it down and then dispel or eject the parts of it. In vertebrates, the innate immunity coexists with their adaptive immunity. Epithelial cells or skin is going to be their first barrier. You've got mucous membranes that are going to line like your respiratory, digestive, urinary, reproductive tracts. And the mucus is going to trap the microbes and other particles so they can't get any further and infect. Saliva, tears, and mucus are also going to bathe your epithelial cells and inhibit colonizing of bacteria. Lysozymes are going to exist in the saliva, tears, and mucus, and they're also going to destroy the cell walls of bacteria. That's what's going to help prevent that growth. Your stomach is very acidic, and so that's going to help to defend you against microbes in food. Doesn't mean that you can't get food poisoning, but it's going to help. Your oil and your sweat glands are going to leave the skin at a pH that's pretty acidic, and that's going to prevent the growth of bacteria because they want to be a little more neutral. Pathogens entering the body are subject to phagocytic cells. Remember, we saw a picture of that. That's where the cell is going to engulf that particle and fuse it with a lysosome cell that has enzymes in it, a lysozyme, and it's going to destroy the pathogen. The phagocytic cells are your neutrophils and your macrophages in mammals. Some are going to migrate and some are going to be in permanent areas of your body. Then you have natural killer cells. These are going to release chemicals that lead to cell death, inhibiting further spread of the pathogen. So you've got lots of defenses. It's kind of like when somebody tries to enter a country. You've got the first line of defense, and then if they get further, you've got a second line, and they get further. And so it's going to keep building until hopefully somebody along the line can get rid of them. In mammals, they also release peptides and proteins that attack the pathogens. Interferons interfere with viral infections, and they limit cell-to-cell spreading of viruses and help control the infection. Pharmaceutical companies actually do not use... I think that's a mistake here. Pharmaceutical companies use recombinant DNA technology to mass produce these interferons to help treat viral infections. The complement system consists of about 30 proteins in the blood plasma that are activated by substances on the surface of many microbes, and that is going to result in a series of steps that are going to cause the invading cells to lyse. Remember, that means to burst open. Your inflammatory response is actually part of your innate immune system. Remember, this is an immediate. So the pain and the swelling is due to signaling molecules brought on by the injury or the infection. You have histamine is going to be a signaling molecule, and it's going to trigger nearby blood vessels to dilate and become more permeable. The macrophages and the neutrophils are going to discharge cytokines that promote blood flow to the site of the injury or infection. Again, that's where you're getting the redness and the heat from. And the blood engorged capillaries will leak fluid into the tissues, and that's what's causing your swelling. Your fever is actually another inflammatory response. It's the body's thermostat is set to a higher temperature, and that's going to help to kill the bacteria, the viruses. The benefits of that are really kind of a subject of debate. Most doctors will now tell you that if your fever is really low, like 99, 100, not to maybe treat it because it might be helping to kill the pathogen. But then at some point you get the fever gets too high and it actually cause harmful effects. When the whole body has an inflammatory response, it's no longer localized. It's actually called septic shock. You may have heard that somewhere. Somebody goes into septic shock, or sometimes they call it sepsis. And that's going to be characterized by high fever, low blood pressure, and poor blood flow. And that's an immediate emergency. And that's because instead of that localized inflammatory response, the whole body is having that response. So this shows you, for example, an inflammatory response if you have a splinter. So this is causing injury. And all of a sudden you're going to get these cells that are going to come in and they're going to try to destroy that. Neutrophils are going to be activated, and that's going to cause increase in the blood vessels, going to cause swelling, heat. Adaptations have evolved in some pathogens that enable them to avoid destruction by the phagocytic cells. For example, tuberculosis. This is a bacteria that causes tuberculosis. And this has actually evolved over time to be resistant to the medications that we currently use for it, and also has been able to avoid those cells that are supposed to engulf it and get rid of it before you have a problem. Your adaptive immunity relies on T cells and B cells. These are types of white blood cells called lymphocytes. Any substance that elicits a response from B or T cells is called an antigen. Recognition occurs when the B or T cells bind to the antigen. Remember that, just kind of, as you're thinking, killer T cells are what HIV is targeting, which is why HIV is such a problem, because it's targeting your immune system, which is what's supposed to fight the virus in the first place. So here we have the antigen receptors on top of the mature B cell or T cell. These are the antigen receptors. The antigen will bind to that receptor. Your antibodies, often abbreviated like this, or immunoglobulins, are produced from your B cells, and they recognize the antigens. So here is your pathogen. This is the bad guy. The antigen is on the pathogen. This is how it's going to recognize your cell, and then this is going to be your antigen receptor, and then you're also going to create antibodies that recognize that. So what's really cool about the adaptive immunity is that you have a memory for it. Prior exposure to an antigen is going to alter the speed, strength, and duration of the immune response. A second exposure is called a secondary immune response, and it's what's completely unique about adaptive immunity. It basically learns from previous exposure. So here's a graph indicating this, and this is going to be part of your pathogen lab. You're kind of going to see this. But so here is your exposure to antigen A, and then here's your exposure to antigen A and B, and then you're going to produce these antibodies against it. The primary immune response is going to be pretty low, but then the secondary is going to be really high, and that's going to help you to fight it. The humoral immune response occurs in the blood and the lymph, where antibodies, remember these are fluids, where antibodies help neutralize or eliminate toxins and pathogens in the blood and the lymph. So we're talking fluids here. And then the cell-mediated immune response is going to deal with specialized T cells that destroy the infected host cells. So they're actually destroying cells that are infected. And so this just shows you your lymph system. If you've ever had like your lymph nodes maybe poked and prodded, maybe in your neck region, maybe under your arms, sometimes down around your groin, they'll feel those to look for inflammation in those, or that they're swelling. That's the word I was looking for there, because that will indicate that maybe there's an infection. Okay, so let's talk about active versus passive immunity. Active immunity is where the defense that arises when a pathogen infects the body and prompts a primary or secondary immune response. Passive is provided by the mother to guard against pathogens that have never infected the newborn, because passive immunity does not involve the recipient's B and T cells. It lasts a few weeks to a few months after birth. So passive is something that's passed on to your babies, the mother to the child. And that is why breastfeeding is so important, is that passive immunity is being passed through the mother's milk. And as long as she's nursing, she's continuing to transfer that protection. And that is just lasts for a few weeks, for a few months, and then your active immune system will take over. Immunizations. So before I get to immunizations real quick, let me kind of recap of what I want you to remember here. I want you to go back and I want you to make sure you know the difference between, because there's a lot you can learn about the immune system. But what I really want to make sure you know is you know the difference between innate versus adaptive immunity. Okay, so make sure you know that. I want you to understand the inflammatory response. I want you to understand what an antigen is, what an antibody is. I want you to understand immunological memory. This is probably going to show up somewhere on the AP exam. Just trying to give you an idea of that. And then I want you to understand in your adaptive immunity, so you've got your innate and you've got your adaptive. Within the adaptive immunity, you've got these two things, the humoral response and the cell-mediated response. And then understanding the difference between active and passive immunity. So immunizations. Active immunity results from immunizations because the body mounts a secondary immune response. This is part of your lab as well. Disruptions in the immune system. So allergies are basically your immune system reacting to some kind of foreign allergen. And everybody has a different allergen problem. Some people really don't have an immune response, and some people do. You're basically creating histamines as a response to those allergens that your body's seeing as a threat. And so that's why you take an allergy medicine, which is an antihistamine. It's trying to reduce that histamine response. Seriousness with this is anaphylactic shock. That's where the whole body responds to the allergen. This is where you might see people that have an EpiPen because they have a bee sting allergy or peanut allergy, something like that. An autoimmune disease is also another disruption of the immune system. Basically, your body is able to self-tolerate itself. It doesn't attack itself. But people that have autoimmune diseases, the immune system is attacking their own cells instead of attacking the foreign things that are coming in. Lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and type 1 diabetes and MS, those are all actually autoimmune disorders. So this is what I was talking about with allergies. Here's your allergen. It is recognized by see if you can identify what that is. Okay, good. You should have said antigen, right? Yeah, okay. And then you create antibodies, and that's going to fight it. The histamine is produced from this, from the allergen, because your body cannot take it. Oh, that was it. We are done.